Okay, this is the last part of this lesson, which has to do with functionalism. And going on with this history of linguistics, we are going to talk about a bit this idea of the origins of how functionalism originated. And we can start with the Polish anthropologist Malinowski. That he studied some of the language of the South Sea Islanders, which could only be understood associated with their culture. If you didn't have any idea of what their culture was about, it was impossible to learn their language. So he stated that the real linguistic fact is the full utterance within its context of situation. So this was kind of the origin of start thinking, even though we talked about the other Firth and the other anthropologists. But in this case, thinking about language within its context and understanding the messages within a certain context was the job or the work of many anthropologists. And following Malinowski's ideas, Firth, he was British, he argued that language must be studied at all levels in its context of situation and with emphasis on meanings. So with Bloomfield, we remember that he analyzed language phonetically, syntactically, morphologically, without the idea of semantics. Okay, semanticity was stayed aside. Now here they place emphasis on meaning, on studying the language in its context of situation. So he said that the linguist has to study the text, that is to say the corpus of the utterances, in their linguistic environment or context, and that is to say in relation to the surrounding language items, the linguistic environment, but also in their context of situations, that is to say in relation to non-verbal constituents which have bearing on the utterance, the persons, the objects and events that are surrounding that utterance, not the utterance in isolation. Okay? So following this Neo-Firthian theory, we call a Neo-Firthian theory, and here we have a British linguist who is very, very, very important, and his name is Michael Halliday. And what he did was to elaborate and systematize the theoretical concepts which were originally suggested by Firth, and who led a development of linguistics in Britain at about the same period during which structuralism made headway in America. So remember that Bloomfield was in America, and now we have all a different trend which is in Great Britain. And the differences maybe here would be this approach to semantics. So on the basis of Firthian ideas, he presented a synthesis of concepts which aims at being theoretical, powerful, and it could be useful to apply in the description of any language, of natural languages. And so Halliday gave a linguistic descriptions on 3 levels, and he said that it would be possible to study any language based on these 3 levels. The first level was the level of substance, which is phonic or graphic, that has to do with phonetics and phonologies, that is to say, to examine the phonic substance, all the sounds that compose that language, the graphology, in case it has, and then another level is the form, that is to analyze the grammar and lexicology, and finally, and which was omitted in Bloomfield's theory, which is the context. That has to do with semantics, that studies the context which relates linguistic form to non-linguistic events. So we have the substance, which is phonographic, the form, which is grammar and lexicology, and the context, which is the semantics. He also said that the description of any language requires 4 fundamental theoretical categories: the unit, structure, class, and system. Unit has to do with a stretch of utterance that carries a grammatical pattern. That could be a sentence or a phrase. the structure is an arrangement of elements in relation to other elements. A subject, for example, a subject and a predicate. Then we have the class, which is illustrated such paradigmatic concepts as noun and verbs, class. And the system, which is applied to closed sets of items such as personal pronouns, tenses, or aspects. So class, we can refer to lexical categories, okay, open class words, and then we have systems or closed class, that personal pronouns, tenses, or aspects. So he said that with these 4 basic categories, it is possible to describe the grammar of all languages. So he said that in grammar there is like a path, okay, in which we study morpheme, word, phrase or group, clause, and sentence. And in phonology is it contains a phoneme, syllable, foot, and tone group. So his schema was an ambitious attempt to develop a theory of a high degree of universality. So basically what I'm talking about here is like as Bloomfield tried to design a set of procedures to research and investigate and to study in a scientific way, to study language in a scientific way, and he developed a set of structures. Halliday did something similar, but in Great Britain, in that adding this dimension of context, okay, and he developed this categorization, okay, to describe the system of language. The attempt here is to describe natural languages. Remember that there were many native languages and they needed kind of guidelines to be described. So all these studies led to functionalism, which was one of the most important schools, one of the other important schools of thought that started to develop around 1930. So it totally continues structuralist ideas, but focusing on the functions of language and individual linguistic features. So functionalists are strongly committed to a view of language which takes its role in communication as central to study and analysis. It doesn't happen to all schools of thought. You're going to see with Chomsky that he doesn't care about exchanging or he doesn't care about communication. He studies the sentences and words in isolation. But functionalists have this idea in mind of the view of language as communication. And here we refer to, remember, communicative language teaching, and here is like the nexus, yes, with communicative language teaching and analyzing that language is a vehicle for communication and the negotiation of meaning. And language is used in all kinds of verbal social interactions for asking questions, for giving commands, making promises, expressing wishes, etc. And these different uses are known as speech acts. Yeah, that was coined by Searle in 1969. So, what is the task of the teacher in this case? I mean, if I'm connecting this with didactics, to create real-life situations in which the students have opportunities for asking questions, giving commands, because this is the real use of language. This is what language is for, according to functionalism. Functionalism also refers to the study of the form of language. They do not say, well, there is not a set of patterns or language has no structures. No, they do not say that. But the form of language in reference to the social function in communication. This is the main difference, and this is how communicative language teaching takes the ideas from. So it considers the individual as a social being and investigates the way in which he or she acquires language and uses it in order to communicate with others in her social environment. And so we have Halliday, the representative in the systemic functional grammar theory. So this is very important to know. We are like connecting this idea with didactics. So there are 3 main functions of language according to this trend. An expressive function that allows the addressers to express their own beliefs and feelings, the expressive function. Remember that in communicative language teaching, when we were dealing in interactionism, we talked about different, the charts with different functions. Okay, that would be very useful. We can take some ideas from that chart. And a representative function that allows us to talk about the world, what we see, what we know, our knowledge, and an appellative function that allows the dresser to make a request or issue a command, an appellative, yes? Asking for something. Very, very clear, yes? Very important function. So when we're going to write our plans, we need to think, okay, think about the functions, yes? So asking for something, talking about the word, expressing opinions, expressing feelings. Okay, so this is very short comparing to the others, but I want you to make clear, to have these ideas very clear in mind. So we have structuralism, and structuralism works based on this idea of psychology, or behaviorist psychology. So that's why audiolingualism responds to that, the nature of language. When we talk about the nature of language, we talk about structuralism and audiolingualism that comes from behaviorism. And in this case, in the case of communicative language teaching, and we talk about interactionism, that is to say, how people modify their speech to make it comprehensible for kids to exchange information in language. Remember Vygotsky that said that paid attention to those conversations between adults and kids, and through those conversations you make sense of the word, and you make sense of what was going on, and you have thought, your inner thoughts emerge into speech. But due to those conversations, due to the interaction, yes, with another one. And so these ideas have to do, everything gets together here, yes? It's like a puzzle. We're putting pieces together. And so when we think in terms of functionalism, we think this idea of communication and doing something with the language in a social interaction. And it's not only important to know about the language, which is the linguistic competence, but also we need to have other types of competencies. That has to do with pragmatic competence and social linguistic competence. That is what to say and what to say to whom, how and when. Remember those ideas. So they studied language, but with that perspective. Yes, the perspective that has to do with that social interaction. Well, I hope all these explanations are useful for you. You have a lot to read if you want, but this is just to put, as I said before, to put pieces together. Okay? Thank you so much for listening.